Hey everybody, welcome to assignment 2 of Unit 4, Commerce and Culture. This evening you're going to be looking at reading pages 336 through 338 and completing questions 3 through 9. And if you need some help getting through all of those questions, just watch this little honey right here. How can you say no to this face? Oh, that's right. Good girl, good girl. All right. So moving on here, the words that I'd like you to look at tonight and highlight within your text, the first definition is conducive, which means to make something possible on page 336, and that ladder made this climbing into the moon possible. Next is broker, which is to arrange or negotiate, also on page 336, and here we have what appears to be a fake Steve Harvey and a fake President Trump, as he's saying no deal. So there's no deal being brokered there. Thirdly is espionage on page 337, which is the act of spying. And if you're spying like this, you are not doing a very good job of it. I think we can all see what you're doing. And lastly is a vestment, which is a robe worn by a clergy member on page 338. And this member is... I know you're probably waiting for the robe to get stuck in it, which is horrible, by the way. But no, he's just making life easier and moving kind of fast, too. So those are what we're going to look for. So I will join you back here on page 336 at the top for some question support. The growth of the Silk Roads. The beginnings of the Silk Roads lay in both geography and history. As a geographic unit, Eurasia is often divided into inner and outer zones that represent quite different environments. Outer Eurasia consists of a relatively warm, well-watered area suitable for agriculture, which provided the settling for great civilizations of China, India, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. The Inner Eurasia, the lands of eastern Russia and Central Asia, lie much further north and has a harsher and drier climate, much of it not conducive, and highlight that word, conducive, to agriculture. Herding these animals from horseback, the pastoral people of this region had for centuries traded with and raided their agricultural neighbors to the south. Products of the forest of semi-arid northern grasslands known as the steppes, such as hides, furs, livestock, wool, and amber, were exchanged for the agricultural products and manufactured goods of the adjacent civilizations. The movement of pastoral peoples for thousands of years also served to diffuse Indo-European languages, bronze metallurgy, horse-based technologies, and more, all across Eurasia. So, question number 3, describe the outer zone of the Eurasian Silk Road. Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's right. It was relatively warm, suitable for agriculture, and well-watered. Which leads us into question 4, then, to describe the inner zone of the Eurasian Silk Road. Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's right. It was much more harsh, very dry, and certainly not supportive of agriculture. Continuing on, page 336. The construction of the classical civilizations and their imperial states during the last 5 centuries of BCE added another element to these earlier Eurasian connections. From the south, the Persian Empire invaded the territory of pastoral peoples in present-day Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. From the west, Alexander the Great's empire stretched well into Central Asia. From the east, China's Han Dynasty extended in authority westward, seeking to control the nomadic Xiongnu to gain access to the powerful heavenly horses that were so important to Chinese military forces. By the early centuries of the Common Era, indirect trading connections often brokered, and highlight that word, brokered, pastoral peoples, linked the classical civilizations in a network of transcontinental exchange. So let's take a look at question number 5. Why did China's Han Dynasty extend their authority westward? Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's right. It's to strengthen their military forces with the heavenly horses. Continuing on page 336. The Silk Road trading networks prospered most when large and powerful states provided security for merchants and travelers. Such conditions prevailed during the classical era when the Roman and Chinese empires anchored long-distance commerce at the western and eastern ends of Eurasia. Silk Road trade flourished again during the 7th and 8th centuries of the Common Era as the Byzantine Empire, the Muslim Abbasid dynasty, and Tang dynasty China created an almost continuous belt of strong states across Eurasia. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the Mongol Empire briefly encompassed almost the entire route of the Silk Roads in a single state, giving a renewed vitality to long-distance trade. Goods in transit. During prosperous times, especially a vast array of goods made their way across the Silk Roads, often carried in large caravans that traversed the harsh and dangerous steppes, deserts, and oases of Central Asia. In high demand and hard to find, most of these goods were luxury products, destined for an elite and wealthy market, rather than staple goods for only readily moved conditions or commodities of great value could compensate for the high cost of transportation across such long and forbidding distances. Question 6. When did the Silk Road trading networks prosper most, and under what conditions? Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's right. They prospered the most when they had a large variety of goods, and unfortunately, the conditions that they were under were always harsh, dangerous, and obviously took a long time. Continuing on, page 337. Of all these luxury goods, it was silk that came to symbolize this Eurasian exchange system. When China held a monopoly on silk-producing technology, this precious fabric moved generally from east to west. The demand for silk, as well as cotton textiles from India, was so great in the Roman Empire that various Roman writers were appalled at the drain of resources that it represented. They also were outraged at the moral impact of wearing revealing silk garments. "I can see clothes of silk," lamented Seneca the Younger in the 1st century of the Common Era. "If materials that do not hide the body, nor even one's decency, can be called clothes. Wretched flocks of maids labor so that adulteress may be visible through her thin dress, so that her husband has no more acquaintance than any other outsider or foreigner with his wife's body." By the 6th century of the Common Era, however, the knowledge and technology for producing raw silk had spread beyond China. An old Chinese story attributes it to a Chinese princess who smuggled out silkworms in her turban when she was married off to a Central Asian ruler. In a European version of the tale, Christian monks living in China did the deed by hiding some silkworms in a bamboo cane, an act of industrial espionage, and highlight that word, espionage, that allowed an independent silk-producing and silk-weaving industry to take hold in the Byzantine Empire. However it happened, Koreans, Japanese, Indians, and Persians likewise learned how to produce this precious fabric. All right, question 7. According to an old Chinese story, what was the reason for knowledge and technology for producing raw silk spreading beyond China? Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's exactly right. The story goes that a princess smuggled the silkworms under her turban after she was married off to another Asian ruler. Continuing on, the bottom of page 337. As the supply of silk increased, its many varieties circulated even more extensively across Eurasian trade routes. In Central Asia, silk was used as currency and as a means of accumulating wealth. In both China and the Byzantine Empire, silk became a symbol of high status, and the governments passed laws that restricted silk clothing to members of the elite. Furthermore, silk became associated with the sacred in the expanding world religions of Buddhism and Christianity. Chinese Buddhist pilgrims who made their way to India seeking religious texts and relics took with them large quantities of silk as gifts to the monasteries they visited. Buddhist monks in China received purple silk robes from Tang dynasty emperors as a sign of high honor. In the world of Christendom, silk wall hangings, altar covers, and vestments became highly prestigious signs of devotion and piety. Because no independent silk industry developed in Western Europe until the 12th century of the Common Era, a considerable market developed for silks imported from the Islamic world. Ironically, the splendor of Christian churches depended in part on Islamic trading networks and on silks manufactured in the Muslim world. Some of these silks were even inscribed with passages in the Arabic from the Quran, unbeknownst to the European buyers. Question 8. Economically, how was trade on these Silk Roads significant? Stop and think and respond. Yeah, that's right. Silk became currency and an example of wealth and high status and power. Continuing on 338 with your last paragraph. Compared to contemporary global commerce, the volume of trade on the Silk Roads was small, and its focus on luxury goods limited its direct impact on most people. Nonetheless, it had important economic and social consequences. Peasants in the Yangtze River Delta of southern China sometimes gave up the cultivation of food crops, choosing to focus instead on producing silk, paper, porcelain, lacquerware, or iron tools, much of which was destined for the markets of the Silk Roads. In this way, the impact of long-distance trade trickled down to affect lives of the ordinary farmers. Furthermore, favorably placed individuals could benefit immensely from long-distance trade. The 12th century Persian merchant Ramst made a personal fortune from his long-distance trading business and, with his profits, purchased an enormously expensive silk covering for the Kaaba, the central shrine of Islam in Mecca. All right, question 9. In some societies, how did trade shape Chinese merchants and long-distance traders? Stop and think and respond. And yeah, that's exactly right. Some farmers gave up their jobs cultivating crops and farming and instead chose to produce silk, other goods, all which were intended to be traded along these Silk Roads. And kiddos, that is it. That's all the questions done. Hope you had a good time with this. Have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.